Good morning, everybody. We're going to get the program started here in just a moment, so if you please would find your seats, grab some food if you need some still. Okay, my name is Abigail Bosch. I've had the pleasure of serving as the student director this year for the Protective Order Project. I'm sure many of you know, but for those of you who don't, we are a completely student-run organization that helps victims of domestic violence, stalking, and sexual abuse to obtain civil protective orders from the court. This year, we handled a record 118 cases. That was up even 20 more from... Thank you. That was up 20 cases from last year, which was also a record year. So we're very pleased with the growth that our organization has seen in the last 2-3 years, which is in large part thanks to many of the groups of people who are in this room that I'd like to take the time to recognize now. So first, we owe a large thank you to our faculty advisor, Professor Seth Lawn, for all the work he puts into running the organization, making sure we don't do anything that borders malpractice and lose our ability to practice before we even take the bar. So thank you, Professor Lawn. Next, our community partners, Middleway House, the POAP in the courthouse. Sarah Hunt has able to join us today. We're so happy to have you here and to continue our partnership. We get a lot of referrals from Sarah Hunt and her team over at the clerk's office, so we're very grateful for that partnership and the others we've formed as well. Of course, our Protective Order Project board this year was amazing. Our student volunteers, we had almost 60, a little more than 60 this year who worked on cases every day of the week. So last but not least, we owe a huge thank you to the volunteer attorneys who staff our cases. Not only do they handle hearings for our clients in court, but they teach our volunteers and our certified legal interns a ton about how to handle a case and how to be a good advocate for the clients that we see in POP. So that brings us to the purpose of this event. We created this event to say thank you to those of you in the community who have helped us run POP this year and years previous. We wanted to give you this opportunity to get some free food, get a free CLE credit, and also just touch base with you and express our gratitude. Last but not least, I'd like to thank our volunteer attorney coordinator, Elizabeth Pagel to my left, for organizing this entire event. If you'd please join me. Elizabeth did a great job this year, and she spearheaded this entire presentation, even recruited our speaker, who I'm going to bring Elizabeth up here to introduce now. So thank you.
Good afternoon. So I just want to begin with a shameless plug. The Protective Order Project can always use volunteer attorneys. So if any of you are interested in how to become involved in our project, we have some flyers at the door, but then myself, Abigail, Professor Lawn, we would all be happy to speak with you on, how you can volunteer in the future. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker. Ms. Courtney Curtis is an alumna of Indiana University Maurer School of Law. She is the Division Chief of the Special Victims Team in Marion County. The Special Victims Team is comprised of 30 attorneys specializing in the screening and prosecution of domestic violence, sex crimes, child abuse, and human trafficking. Ms. Curtis also serves on the Marion County Child Fatality and Neglect Trial Team and chairs the Marion County Child Fatality Review on behalf of Terry Curry, the elected prosecutor. Courtney has been with the Marion County Prosecutor's Office since May of 2002 when she began as an intern, so there's hope for all of us out there. She has been a sworn deputy prosecutor since 2004 and has served in the homicide, major felony, and municipal divisions, as well as the former sex crime and domestic violence unit that now comprise the Special Victims Team. In addition to her work in Marion County, Courtney assists the National District Attorneys Association in training deputy prosecutors around the country on issues of sex crimes and child abuse. In 2014, Ms. Curtis traveled to Mexico City on behalf of the Conference of Western Attorneys General in order to train deputy prosecutors in Mexico as they enacted a constitutional right to trial by jury for the first time. Not that Ms. Curtis needs any bolstering, but I'll go ahead and do it. She's an amazing attorney and someone I greatly look up to. Ms. Courtney Curtis.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Whenever I hear about, she didn't put when I graduated, that's purely by design. Because when I hear my resume, it makes me feel old, but I came in here and this is the exact same upholstery that we had on those chairs when I was here in whatever year. And I graduated from high school back in the 1900s, so that will tell you a little something about how old I am. I am excited to be here. If you heard what I do for a living, I am the division chief of the Special Victims Team for Marion County. That's located in Indianapolis, Indiana, for those of you who might be from out of state. What I do for a living is the exact thing that stops conversations at dinner parties, 4th of July, what have you. Anyone who asks what I do, and I tell them I prosecute on behalf of victims of domestic violence, sex crimes, child abuse, child fatality, or human trafficking, it pretty much stops the conversation right there. So I'm an expert in things that are sad. This is an exciting topic to me, though, because the work that we are doing in this realm of the neurobiology of trauma is something that, for those of us who work with victims, we have known this for a long time. We have known that victims speak differently than the rest of us, and it makes it difficult for the rest of us who don't have those experiences to understand. And yet, what do we ask juries to do? We ask them to bring their common sense and life experiences into a jury box and make a decision based upon those. And if you haven't been a victim of trauma, how do you do that? So this is exciting to me because I'm finally able to say and learn that there is science that backs up what I have seen with my own two eyes for years. I do want to tell you that the research in this area focuses primarily, and this discussion will focus a lot on some language of sexual assault. So just like when I pick a jury for a rape trial, I do want to tell you some people have difficulty paying attention if you use the common normal words for the human genitalia. I won't be crass, not today, on your time anyway. Probably around 2 I will be on my time. But I won't be crass. I won't say anything offensive. If you are a person who does have trouble hearing that term, it's not going to be frequent. You'll be okay. I won't bother you with it. Understanding the impact of trauma helps to shatter rape culture and the perpetration of violence against women. And I will tell you, I do believe that we live in a rape culture right now. I believe that it's everywhere. I believe that it's on Facebook. I believe that it's on Twitter. I believe it's at the VMAs. I believe that it's all over the place. And that's what I do when I pick a jury, is to try to shatter that culture and to keep women and children safe. It promotes healing for victims, which in turn allows us to have higher institutes or higher numbers and levels of reporting. And when that happens, we have better interviews, we have better investigations, we promote public safety, we have greater offender accountability, and we promote public trust. So I am excited to talk to you about this because no matter what you choose to do, whether you choose to be a civil attorney or a prosecutor or you like to look at contracts, sometime in your life, because someone hears that you are a lawyer, they will want to talk to you about the worst thing that ever happened to them. And you, as a lawyer, have been taught for 3 or 4 years, however long it's taking you to do that, if you have 2 degrees or 1, you are being taught to judge. And when you listen to a victim talk about his or her life experience, you must not judge. We need to be able to take that information in, and I'm going to give you the keys to do that today. Disclosure, if you take nothing away from this presentation today, just remember this. Disclosure is a process, not an event. So what are we going to do today? Well, first we're going to describe neurological structures and the process involved in all major forms of trauma. Why? Because I'm not a doctor. And I'm assuming none of you are either. So when I learned about the brain, I realized that we have to talk about that first, or nothing I tell you is going to make any sense. Then we're going to examine the neurobiology of assault and shootings as specific forms of trauma, and finally discuss implications and how to conduct trauma-based interviews. So without further ado, this is your brain. It's an MRI scan of the brain. What happened was research was done on the brain and corresponding hormone levels to determine what is happening in the brain and which structures are active during any major form of trauma. This is the cerebrum. So from an evolutionary standpoint, the cerebrum is the newest part of the brain. It's the part that makes you, the part that decides what flavor of Pop-Tarts you really like, or if you drink coffee and how, or if you think British humor is funny, or what your favorite color is. Everything that makes you a person with this personality is in your cerebrum. It's the part that houses the most distinctly human characteristics. This portion that's circled right here, it's right behind your forehead, and it's called the prefrontal cortex, and it's where we have complex cognition. So what is that? Well, it's the capacity to be in the moment, to process what's happening to us, to remember and recall prior similar experiences, and then take this new experience that you're encountering, weigh it against your prior experience, and then decide what I'm going to do with that. I'm going to weigh the pros and cons of what I should do. I'm going to make a decision, and then I'm going to execute it. All that sounds rather lengthy. It can be a millisecond. It can be moments. It can be longer. But regardless, that process takes place in the prefrontal cortex of your cerebrum. This area of the brain, our decision-making center, is highly impacted by trauma and is severely compromised. These are the structures underneath, and specifically, we're looking right in this area here. From an evolutionary standpoint, we just talked about what's the part that makes you you. This is the old brain. It handles the more primitive functions like your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your blood pumping, those types of things that are keeping you alive. Some of the key structures that are active in any major form of trauma are here in the old brain. Why is that? Well, if you think about it, it makes sense. Your body actually shuts down your immune system and your digestive system during trauma because it is not important that you stave off a flu. It is not important that you digest your hot dog or whatever. It is important that you live. What is the number one goal of anyone experiencing trauma? Survive. And your brain knows that. There are four main structures that are impacted by trauma, and they are very carefully protected deep inside the structure of the brain. So from an evolutionary standpoint, trauma makes sense. Trauma and how we deal with it is how we have survived as a species. So our story begins with the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of your brain that's like an overbearing nana who's constantly scanning the environment for things that might hurt you. So like when your mother says, you should really be home by 9 o'clock, and you should really call me by 9:01, and do you know about a rape whistle, and do you know about all these things? Your mom is just being your amygdala. So the amygdala is constantly scanning the environment, whether you realize it or not, and looking for things that might kill you. So when you encounter a major trauma, the amygdala works your brain and your body to help you process emotion. Why is that? If you encounter major trauma, you have a corresponding emotion. You might be scared. You might be angry. You might be, I guess those are probably the most likely two things. But either way, your body needs to process that emotion because we need to do that in order to stay alive. We also need to lay down a memory of it. Why is that? Because as a society, if you don't remember as a caveman what to do when you encounter a saber-toothed tiger, then you will not survive that. The species won't. If you encounter every trauma like your Dory from Finding Nemo, then you're not going to make it. So if every time you walk out of this law school and you go to cross the street, you have no idea how to do that with these speeding articles that are coming towards you, you're going to get hit by a car. So in trauma, we have to deal with the emotion so that it can be set aside, and we have to lay down a memory of this so that we can survive it if it happens to us again. It helps us communicate, prevent, neutralize, and do something about it. So the amygdala is the part of the brain that's hardwired to help us process emotions and the memory of trauma. In the emotional loop of any major trauma, once your amygdala detects the threat, it signals a structure in your brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, can you all see? You can see what those are? Good. Okay. The hypothalamus is the information switching center in the brain, and its job is to communicate to other structures in the brain and body. The hypothalamus, the amygdala signals the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is your master gland that is to all the other glands. So, for example, your thyroid, your pancreas. But the one we're most interested in is your adrenals. Your adrenals are sitting, it's very hard to see this, they're sitting way down here on top of your kidneys. And this brain-body loop is called the HPA axis. So the amygdala starts things out, it's scanning, it detects a threat, and it notifies the hypothalamus, the H, which notifies the pituitary, the P, which is in charge of the adrenal. And it lets the brain know, hey, we're experiencing a major traumatic event here. And the adrenals are what responds. And they respond by releasing a large amount of hormones or chemicals that help with the emotional and behavioral components of being in one of these major traumas. And what do they release? Different people are going to secrete different amounts of these hormones, but all of these hormones can be found in the blood of anyone who suffered a major form of trauma. So we'll start with the catecholamines. In any major trauma, your body needs to jack up to fight or flight. Who's heard of fight or flight? We all have, right? Okay, so your body has to jack up to do that. If you come, oh gosh, I've come home before my door's kind of open because it just didn't shut all the way. That rush that you feel where your heart is pounding or it's difficult to breathe, that's your catecholamines. It's adrenaline. Whether or not you are actually able to engage in fight or flight, though, is dependent upon cortisol. Cortisol is the hormone that affects the energy available in your body to act. So if you're going to do something about this threat, you cannot just have adrenaline. You need catecholamines and cortisol to have the energy for fight or flight. A lot of times that doesn't happen. Your body will jack itself up with natural adrenaline, and if the cortisol levels don't jack up as well, then your body will freeze. So the technical term is not actually fight or flight. It is fight, flight, or freeze. And any one of these three can happen in a major trauma. The hardest thing I deal with is that people imagine themselves to be a certain way. I'm a tall girl. I got broad shoulders and a square jaw. I'm here to tell you, I think if you try to attack me, I will lay you out. Not true. I startle easily. There's a time when I came out of I was coming out of my bathroom into my master bedroom, getting ready to go to sleep at night. All the lights were turned out. I'm getting ready to go to bed. For whatever reason, I shut the light off before I opened the door. And you know when that happens, it takes a while for your eyes to accustom to the dark. And I opened the door, and there was this figure of a man standing in front of me. And he was about the height of my husband, and he was about the weight of my husband, and I hadn't heard anyone come in. The garage door hadn't come up. My dogs weren't barking. The children were fine, and we're in the bedroom that my husband shares with me. All of those things should tell me, and would tell me if I had time to think about it, that that's my husband and we're going to be okay here. I freaked out. I screamed, even after he was like, whoa, what's going on here? I'm crying, but I'm like laughing through the tears, but I'm crying because I'm still jacked up about it. My cortisol levels bottomed out. So as much as I think if you touched my elbow, I would turn and hit, I will not do it. I am in a very safe parking garage after this, though, so I would, please don't follow me and touch my elbow, because I will scream and cry at you. So the people who say, oh, let it roll, I would go down fighting, you couldn't get a thing out of me, that's who you want to be. You don't know who you really are. And when you know that, that tells us that we cannot say, this is how I would behave, and expect that that is the normal way for a victim of trauma to act. It is not a decision. How do you know it's not a decision? Because during a form of major trauma, for these to even be released, your prefrontal cortex has shut down. Your brain is physically unable to make decisions. So this is just a response of your body, all on its own. This is hormonally driven by the adrenal gland and hormones. Your body decides for you if it's fight, flight, or freeze, and it lets you know later. You don't weigh in at all. So this is all dependent upon which hormones are released and in what concentration. Opioids and oxytocin, those help with the pain of trauma. Opioids are a natural morphine. So if you've ever seen anybody who had their wisdom teeth removed, they're on morphine, what do they look like? A wet blanket, right? Or just Jell-O sitting on the couch, if they even made it to the couch. So we have a natural morphine in our bodies, and it blocks other emotions too. So someone who has a high release of opioids due to trauma is going to be very blunt and have very flat affect. They may tell you about the event in a way that it seems like it either didn't happen or it doesn't matter to them. The reality is very scary because our impression of that person will be that they don't care or that they're just lackadaisical about it. And the truth is that it was so traumatic for them that they had that high release of opioids. It was so profound that their body is blurring all emotion and pain on their behalf. And oxytocin promotes good feelings. Oxytocin is not as common in domestic violence or sexual assault, but it's possible. It occurs, sometimes you'll see it if there are police officers, for instance, that have been survived shooting incidents. Sometimes they're walking back to their cruisers and they're kind of like laughing a little bit to themselves. When they get back to their cruiser, they're not still yucking it up. They almost died. Once they have that moment for the adrenaline to leave their bodies and they're sitting there like that lump of Jell-O that we talked about, it's not funny to them. This oxytocin was released to counterbalance negative feelings. So too high of a release can cause someone to seem almost happy about the event, but I assure you they are not. For any major form of trauma, the brain body needs to lay down a memory of this. We talked about that. Humans are hardwired to try and remember traumatic experiences. So we talked about what happens to the brain for trauma. Now let's talk about what happens to the brain to lay down a memory. The amygdala signals the hippocampus, and the hippocampus's job is to process information to memory. This is a two-step process. The first step is encoding. Encoding is the process of sorting or organizing sensory information coming into your brain. So all day long, your brain's picking up information. It's picking up, that guy has on a green shirt, that guy has an orange shirt, how did I drive down here, where did I park? All of these things are just coming in mass, like a shovel, like someone's just shoveling all this information into my brain. And all day long, your hippocampus is tagging where that information came from. But these memories, these pieces of events that are going to become a memory, all look the same when they first come in. To lay down a proper memory that we can discuss from start to finish, I can't have, see, I'm a roamer. I tried to go over and touch that. But I won't be videoed then. I can't have lunch, okay? Like let's say that we're talking about, this is what I drank for lunch, but that's what I ate for lunch. And this is how I felt about my lunch. And this is what happened right after lunch. I'm not going to be able to tell you about lunch if I'm keeping it all over there. So the second process to laying down a memory is to process it. It's to encode it. It's to organize it. To make a memory, you have to do the second step. It's called consolidating or grouping. With any major form of trauma, this is what's hard to do. Sensory information is filled with emotion, and the amygdala has to work with the hippocampus to process, code, and consolidate. They are very sensitive structures to hormonal fluctuation. So depending upon which hormones are released and in what concentration and how those are going through your bloodstream, it can be easy or it can be extremely difficult to lay down a memory. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what hormones are the most damaging to the hippocampus and the amygdala? You don't have to pronounce them. I'm not going to call. I don't play good at law professors, so you're. Oh, it's these. Oh, good. Right here, the catecholamines. They don't just make it difficult. The catecholamines, the cortisol, the opioids, and the oxytocin, when released by your adrenals, actually cause cellular damage in the hippocampus and the amygdala. So it doesn't just impair memory consolidation. In some ways, it makes it almost impossible. The fact that we lay down a memory at all is sort of a minor miracle. It is very likely that a victim of major trauma is not going to have a perfect memory. So what do we do? when we work with trauma survivors? Well, first, now you're smart about how memory works, and we're smart about how trauma and memory works. So we can be strategic about how we work with survivors to try to get as much as the memory that is in there out. So what do? Now we know how memory works. We know how stress works. Well, there were teams of researchers that would hang out in major hospitals. And when a woman is complaining, or a male for that matter, of sexual assault, then they come into the emergency department and they get triaged from there. And so these researchers would just wait on shift in emergency departments. And when someone would come in complaining, and this research is primarily on sexual assault. However, I think we all know, or you should know, or you know now that I complete this sentence. If you work with survivors of domestic violence, you are working with survivors of sexual assault. It is foolhardy to assume that a man will stalk, harass, shame, or put his hands around a woman's neck, but he won't take off her pants. So, the things that are happening in this presentation that I'm talking to you about, if you work with survivors of domestic violence, that is happening to them too, that is a major form of trauma. And when the patients would come in, and in Indianapolis, we do the nurses who see survivors of sexual assault are the exact same nurses who see survivors of domestic violence. And after their sex assault kit, these researchers would put these patients through an MRI to look and see what part of the brains are active during this trauma. And then they would submit to a blood and urine sample and see just what are the levels of hormones that have been secreted. And the result is that the neurobiology of assault, and in particular sexual assault, unfolds in a way that is very similar across gender lines and also adults versus children. What happens during an assault? Well, the amygdala detects the threat. I'm going to stop there for a second because you might think, okay, Courtney, you already told us the amygdala detects a threat. But what did I tell you the amygdala does? It constantly scans the environment for things that might kill you. This resonates to me that the amygdala detects the threat because it tells me that when you are being raped, you think you will die. And I just want you to imagine that for a second and let that sink in. The amygdala picks up during a sexual assault. So when you're talking to a survivor, she thought she was going to die. Her brain thought it for her. This is true even when it's a non-stranger sexual assault. A survivor's brain operates in the exact same manner, whether it is a stranger, whether it is a friend, whether it is her date, or whether it is her husband. In all of those circumstances, her brain helps her survive this thing that might kill her. The amygdala signals to the hypothalamus, which signals to the pituitary glands down to the adrenal. And for sexual assault in particular, it is a very, very strong release of those from those adrenals. Generally, these three hormones are the ones that are released the most. Catecholamine release tends to be very high for rape victims, and this literally shuts down the prefrontal cortex where your brain is performing the decision-making function. All the circuits that evaluate rational thought are literally flooded with catecholamines. I think it was in my 30s, maybe in my 20s, for sure before I had children. I had this cute little two-seater Mercedes hardtop convertible. Super cute, low to the ground, had a low tailpipe. It was a really rainy day, and I really just was trying to get home very quickly. And I drove across the road, and I knew I shouldn't have done it. And what happens to a tailpipe when you cover it with water? You cannot drive. Your brain cannot drive across a flooded circuit in the same manner that my car did not drive across a flooded road. When your brain is flooded with catecholamines, you cannot make rational decision. This is why there are some victims who will make irrational decisions, who will walk past a police department while looking for an officer to make a report. And then once that catecholamine level drops, then that's when the would-haves and the should-haves and the could-haves are all coming out. And I don't know why, Courtney, that I walked past that department. I don't know why. I was looking for help. Well, she just wasn't able to make that decision. And that's why she can't explain it, because it wasn't something she chose. Opioid release is also very high in sexual assault, and that release can stay high for as long as 4 days. That is also significant in how we deal with survivors, because what is going to occur in those first 4 days? Well, let's assume she doesn't report it to police. But she might tell a friend. She might tell a family member, a spouse, her mother, And if she has flat affect, will they believe her? Let's say she does report it. Who all do you talk to when you report a crime? Well, the police officer shows up. So you talk to, we'll say him. They're mostly hims, right? So we'll say him. Okay, she may have flat affect. If something significant happened in the course of that, like there's active bleeding, which isn't really common, but let's say there is, or perhaps a strangulation occurred at the time, then we're going to have an EMS worker that's coming, and she's going to talk to that person. A detective is going to get called, and she's going to talk to that person. She's going to go to the hospital for a rape kit, and she's going to talk to that nurse. Another detective, actually, or victim's assistants may take her home, and she might talk to that person. And within a day or two, she's going to give a formal statement to the detective. And if her opioid level is still really high, she is going to have flat affect that entire time. And if you don't know what you don't know, then we have people who are working very hard on behalf of victims. I don't want to malign anyone. I work with people who work very hard. But if they aren't trained on this, and she looks like she doesn't care, it's hard to make other people care for you. So this is very significant to have this information. For many victims, the cortisol levels actually bottom out. And we talked about this earlier. Catecholamines and cortisol can't work together then to make fight or flight possible. So what happens then? Freeze. It can be a second. Have you ever heard deer in headlights? Have you ever seen a deer in headlights? Okay. I mean, they literally look at you like this. And it's interesting because a deer will look at you and their brain is processing, what is this thing? It's lit up. It's coming at me really quickly. I should move. And if they had just moved right at the beginning, they wouldn't get hit by the car, but then they do. So it can be a split second like that, or it can be what's called tonic immobility. Either way, though, it's hardwired for extremely fearful situations. Does anybody know what they tell you to do if you're being attacked by a grizzly bear? What? Play dead. In many situations, it is the safest thing for you to not fight back. What would be the safest thing for you to do if someone has a gun and you don't? You do what they say, right? So in a lot of ways, even though we have these people who think, oh, there'd be his DNA under my nails because I'd be doing this and I'd be doing that, your brain is deciding for you what's the safest way to get out of that. Another hallmark of tonic immobility is difficulty breathing, and the victims describe it as breathing out of the top portion of their lungs, like they can't get a full breath. For some who experience this, or actually most, they know what's happening, but if you have tonic immobility, they physically cannot move, and some of them can't speak. They know what's happening to their bodies, and they can't stop it or fight back or do anything, and it can last as long as a few hours. It is also more likely to happen for victims who have been assaulted before. So let's talk about tonic immobility. In the study that we based this science upon, there was a woman who had been to a college house party. She's 20 years old. She meets a guy. He's cute. She agrees to go to the back bedroom. Nothing weird about this. They go to the back bedroom, and things progress more than she wants them to be. And he begins to have sex with her. He's raping her. She's telling him to stop. And he doesn't, and she freezes. Now, when he finishes and he gets up, he goes out into the party, and he tells his friends, hey, you're not going to believe this. She's still back there. She's still naked. She's laying there. You should have some of that. And so he goes back, and she's still frozen, and he rapes her too. And eventually, there's a line at the door for them to rape this woman who cannot move. Now, she's not alone at this party. Not that it would matter, but she's not alone, and her friend is hearing this hubbub going on and storms back into that room, and God bless her heart, takes her out of the room and drags her down the street. Why? Because the tonic immobility was so strong that the woman's legs did not work until she was 4 blocks away. So her friend dragged her to safety because she could not save herself. So tonic immobility is very real. And yet, what might someone do with that information? You laid there. You didn't do anything. You had sex with one guy. You liked it. You had sex with the other guy. You liked that. You had sex with the other guy. There's a term for it. They're just going to accuse her of that. And yet her legs didn't work. So how does she defend herself? Let's go back to memory. We talked about this as a two-step process. First, we're tagging and writing down pieces of memory, and then we're consolidating them together in a coherent package that's memory of an assault. Okay, let's put that with our model here of what happens in an assault. The stress hormones secreted in the adrenals interfere with consolidation. So what comes out is consolidated. A little bit is stored here in your brain, a little bit stored here, a little bit's here. What does that do for recall? When I try to tell you something that's stored in my brain here and here and here, I can't do it in a linear fashion because I actually have to pull it from different portions of my brain. It's slow and it's difficult. I can't pull up a memory and go from start to finish because it's not stored that way. These chemicals are interfering with that second portion that puts it together in a coherent package. I promise I'll stop hitting that soon. My information from all of this and who trained me was a very brilliant, much smarter woman than I named Dr. Rebecca Campbell, and she gave an example that I'll share with you about how to pull out this memory. So let's imagine that in the course of this presentation that I'm giving you, you want to take notes badly, but you realize you only have one of those like little notepads of Post-it notes. So you're like, okay, so you take a Post-it note about the amygdala, and you put it right here. And then you take another about the hippocampus, and you put it right here. And pretty soon we have your whole station around you is just filled with all these Post-it notes. And at the end, I surprise you. I won't do this, but I surprise you and I say, oh, we're going to have an oral exam, and it really matters you don't get to graduate or take the bar if we don't do this. And I tell you, I say, Elizabeth, I really want to talk to you about oxytocin, and you need to tell me everything about oxytocin, and you will not graduate unless you can tell me about oxytocin. And Elizabeth's looking around for her Post-it notes, and she can't find oxytocin, and her adrenaline's picking up because she's freaking out because Elizabeth very badly wants to graduate and take the bar. And so she's trying to find this Post-it note, but what she finds is consolidation. And she says, I will tell you about oxytocin in a minute, but right now I want to tell you about consolidation, because she thinks, aha, this is a question I can answer. So she's trying to shift. And I say, Elizabeth, pardon me, but I've asked you about oxytocin, and you're trying to tell me about hippocampus, and I haven't even asked you about that. What is the matter with you? Were you not there? Do you not know about oxytocin? Didn't I tell you about oxytocin? How could you possibly tell me about the hippocampus if you can't tell me about oxytocin? I don't even want to hear about anything but oxytocin. How does Elizabeth feel? She's frustrated. She's also angry because I'm not listening to her. She's telling me I was there. If I wasn't there, listen, Courtney, I don't know about the hippocampus. This Post-it note about the hippocampus tells you I was there. Believe me that I was there. There's no evidence to suggest that stress hormones interfere with encoding. If it's written down, it's fine. It's just retrieving it. So we, as we work with survivors, we alter our behavior to help them be their best communicators, to help them be their best selves. Now, well, why might it not get written down? Does anybody think alcohol happens with sex assaults? Yeah, it's pretty common in my line of work. When alcohol is combined with assault, the alcohol can mess up encoding, and then the trauma messes up consolidation. So with our Post-it note example, there are still going to be some Post-it notes that are written on. They're still going to be scattered, but there are going to be a handful that might be blank. And it's interesting because when alcohol interferes, it interferes in a very specific way. It impairs the ability to encode context details. So like what time, where did it happen, or a seamless timeline from start to finish. What do you imagine first officer type questions are? Well, where did this happen? When? There's an evidentiary value to that. There's a safety value too. If I'm an officer on a scene, I need to know if the perpetrator might still be around. I need to know if he had a gun. I need to know if you knew him. I need to know how long ago it was so that I know if you need to see a nurse right now. I need to know if you are safe. So they're not trying to be rude or mean to victims to ask this question. It's very important that they ask those questions. But if your victim can't answer them because of the way her brain is working and the fact that those hormones haven't bottomed out yet, that she's still jacked up, it's very frustrating to her. And how's it going to go right off the bat if she can't answer questions? What if she's the type of person who feels like if she can't answer it, then she's doing something wrong? What if she thinks that if she can't answer it, that officer won't believe her? What happens to her ability or her willingness to stay a part of this process if she thinks that the officer is exasperated or thinks she's lying because she can't answer a very simple question of when did this happen? It may also affect, maybe he doesn't believe her. Maybe he hasn't been trained like you all. So maybe if that affects his next steps, and maybe he doesn't call a detective or send her to the doctor. This is deep stuff. But now we know, so we're going to do better. Encoding may be a problem with alcohol, but the sensory details are still working. All 5 senses are still gathering information, smell in particular. Smell, Courtney? Yes, smell, I tell you. In trauma, increased blood and glucose are going to the limbic system, which is located right near that olfactory bulb. So in traumatic memory, the scent or smell is a gateway to memory. Context details may not be encoded, and what is encoded will absolutely be fragmented. But sensory details might still be encoded. They're possibly also fragmented, but there are some details there to uncover. Let's talk about this case study. In this one, we have a 25-year-old woman. She goes to a 4th of July party. She has 6 drinks over the course of the afternoon, and during the course of that party, she's raped by her friend's brother. Her friend believes her, calls the police for her, and they file a police report, and the officer interviews where it all went to hell. It's a classic good cop, bad cop. He stormed off, and a detective sat down next to me. He offered me coffee. Coffee? Okay, fine. How do I take it? What? Why does he care how I take my coffee? Well, he did. He made me coffee. He gave me time to sit and collect my thoughts. We talked it through, and I didn't feel rattled and freaked out. I'm sure I was incoherent, and he just let it roll. He was patient. I felt like I was piecing it together, like a puzzle. We were putting together a puzzle and drinking coffee. This detective does what so many of the detectives I work with do. He sat and he listened to whatever she had to say. And when he had a question, he wrote it down and he asked her later. And if her brain took a left turn, why, he took one with her. And if it went back right, then he went back right with her. But if it just stayed over here, then that's where he stayed. And she had the ability and the time to remember. Post-shooting trauma. The definition of a post-shooting trauma is the internalization of stress following a shooting, and it's characterized by a combination of stress, fear, confusion, and anxiety, and this occurs even when you are the shooter. So some research was done on post-shooting trauma, and it turns out that if you are involved in a shooting that's similar to a sexual assault, and whether or not you are the shooter, the same event occurs to you. The symptoms are insomnia, nightmares, hallucination, flashbacks, and distortions to memory, like time, sound, and sight. So this isn't something that women are using to make excuses for other women on why we can't remember details of our sexual assault. This is science. It is how your brain works. They did further research with animal models for the neurobiology of trauma, and the first thing they did was expose animals to inescapable stress. Rats and beagles were exposed to, I have a beagle, so sad. Rats and beagles were exposed to a single electric shock to the foot that they couldn't avoid, or forced to swim in cold water without being able to get out. And what happened is it produced a massive output of dopamine and opiates, as well as alterations in cortisol in that HBA axis. And the results, I think, speak to any of us who work with victims of domestic violence, particularly those who are longtime victims. Because beagles who were previously exposed to inescapable shocks would sit passively and not attempt to escape when they were subsequently shocked, even when they could. The animal model of inescapable stress parallels the experience of being pinned down in combat or being the victim of repeated assaults. So when you ask, why didn't she leave? It's because she's already learned that she can't. So there's no reason to try. Animals exposed to inescapable stress develop specific behavioral changes, like deficits in memory, learned helplessness, conditioned fear responses to stressors, aggression, sensitivity to stress, withdrawal. All of these are things that I have been seeing for years with these women and these children. So what are the implications? Because we can't just say, okay, well, it screws you up, so I don't really know what to tell you. We have to be able to do something about this. HPA axis activation can be elevated for up to 96 hours post-assault and whenever that memory is reactivated. So when I have to prep a witness for trial, because I will prep you for trial, I am potentially setting this back into motion. I have seen where I have victims with flat affect, irritability, they're argumentative, headaches, body pain, compromised decision-making. And I have to change what I do. So I have prepped children for trial, and I can't just sit there and say, hey, little buddy, you got to stay with me. This is how we're going to do this, and make him be like me. What I will do is whatever it takes. So I've had a victim who sat in a chair, and he put his head down and his arms up like this because the way he was recalling things made him feel bad about himself. Almost as bad as he felt by what his father and his father's girlfriend had done to him. And so what we do when we work with victims is I crawled on the floor and I laid on the floor under him so that he didn't have to move and he could hold his head and make the pain stop, but I would keep eye contact with him. And I don't tell you that because I'm cool, because I'm not cool. I tell you that because if you work with victims, you've done the exact same thing. So what we are doing now is learning how to talk to them and make them communicate in a way that will make sense to others. But be knowledgeable about the fact that the neurobiological response to trauma will make that consolidation difficult. The story may come out fragmented or sketchy. You should expect there to be some inconsistencies across interviews. The content is accurate. It just takes time and patience for it to come together. And that's misinterpreted often as evasiveness or lying. So what can we do? Well, if you are talking with someone and this has just happened to them, let them sleep. 1 or 2 sleep cycles makes a huge difference in the capacity to bring memories together. Also, talk to them or interview them, depending upon what your job is, in a way that's consistent with the underlying architecture of the memory. So for law enforcement, they don't use a police car. They shouldn't use a police car. Maybe not even a hospital room. Go somewhere comfortable. For me, I interview children in a playroom, and we talk while we play. Or I get down on the floor with them. I don't do a normal interview. And why not? Because a normal interview is interviewing the prefrontal cortex, and that's dumb if the prefrontal cortex didn't even work to begin with. You may encounter someone who will answer questions even if they can't answer it or shouldn't answer it because they are trying to please you, because they think this is my prosecutor, she's going to help me, she's going to keep me safe, and she wants an answer to this question, so I'm going to make something up, or I'm going to say I'm sure about something that I'm not. So I can actually get some inaccurate answers if I'm interviewing the prefrontal cortex. The response then, and what we do instead, is the forensic experiential trauma interview, and it interviews that more primitive part of the brain. It entails the adaptation of principles used in critical incident stress debriefing, forensic child interviewing, and neurobiology of memory and psychological trauma. The focus is for the victim to describe the experience of the event, physically and emotionally. And we get significantly more information because it enhances recall. It reduces that potential for false information, and it allows the victim or witness to recall the experience in the manner in which the trauma was experienced. It also reduces recantation because they are being treated with respect from the beginning. And it increases victim cooperation. In jurisdictions that use this, they have more victims buy in from the beginning and more victims stay in until the end. It's employed by Army Criminal Invest, and there is a White House task force recommendation to employ this process. The state of Louisiana recently enacted a law mandating its use in talking to victims of trauma. How do you do it? Step 1, acknowledge their trauma, pain, or difficult situation. Show genuine empathy, patience, and understanding. I am sorry this happened to you. And this is the portion, believe it or not, that sort of sets sometimes prosecutors or detectives a little askew, because we're supposed to be on a search for the truth. And sometimes if you tell an officer or a prosecutor that they are supposed to act empathetic from the beginning, then they take that to mean I'm not on a search for the truth. False. Aren't there times when police officers will act as if they believe a suspect's bogus statement even though they don't? Yes. So we're used to being fake. Okay? Why is this different? If you aren't sure yet if you believe her, who cares? Does it make you feel good about yourself so that she knows that you're not sure yet? No. You are sorry this happened to her, and you are showing empathy for someone. And that is a technique that allows someone to give you more information, which is exactly what an investigation should be. One of the greatest needs of anyone who's experienced trauma is the need to be safe. And you don't feel safe if you don't trust someone. They are literally sitting on the edges of their seats to see if they're being believed. Ask the victim or witness what they are able to remember about their experience. Able relieves pressure because it doesn't suggest an answer. Experience is an open-ended technique. It also encourages the victim to share all details. There are some people who will, they only answer the questions police officers ask. They really care about authority. So you come later and say, why didn't you tell me this? Well, no one asked me. If you have an open-ended experience question, then we'll get more of that information. Allow the victim to recount the memory in the manner in which she recalls it. Sequential memory may come later. Use prompts. Memory is prompted in a more natural way because we're in the part of the memory that the victim led us to, not the part that we're directing her to. The other added benefit for attorneys is that you are also giving her prompts that are akin or very similar to the prompts that you would give her on direct examination. So this is invaluable. You are learning how she communicates, and that helps you to change the way you ask her questions in court. You are learning how to do your direct exam and how to organize it. You might also focus on grouping similar types of actions together by room or by person. I prosecuted a case where 6 defendants invaded a home and raped the mother and the daughter while the father was there. And the entire time that these women were raped, they were told to keep their eyes closed or their head down, and they were held at gunpoint and moved around the home. And they were assaulted in many different areas of the home, including in one of the cars. And for that reason, the daughter in particular had extreme difficulty knowing who did what to her, when it was, or where it was. And she could not do it in a timeline because she didn't have that visual picture to lay that memory with. So we did, anytime I talked to her, I did not ask her about who. I did not ask her about when. We talked about where. Tell me everything that happened to you in your parents' bedroom. Tell me everything that happened to you in your bedroom. Everything in the hallway. Everything in the kitchen. Everything in the family room. Tell me when your mother was shot. For the father, because he was made to lay in the bed, he also does not remember in a linear timeline. So we would discuss, you are hearing voices in another room. Are they close to you or far away from you? Is it upstairs? Is it downstairs? Is it more than one voice? Does that voice sound male? Are they talking to each other? Are they telling each other anything? What else do you hear? And we're putting him in that room. Do not tell them to start from the beginning. In step 3, ask them about his or her thought process at particular points during the experience. Why? Because I want to know what no looks like. And I want to know what the absence of yes looks like. I can tell you that she said no, but I want to know what putting your hands over your eyes looks like, and folding yourself in and physically shaking looks like. Because that's the absence of yes. And it reduces the need to ask why they didn't fight back or scream or run. For instance, the victim that was frozen due to tonic immobility might say, I thought he was going to kill me, or I couldn't move or scream, or I didn't understand what was happening. And I want to know what that looks like, because when fear is in the room, consent is not. Ask about tactile memories. It's believed that tactile and sensory details may block some memories. So asking about those has been shown to increase the victim or witness's ability to relate the experience with significantly more information. For an example, there was an officer who saw a lady shoot herself in the head. And after that happens, the officer was interviewed, and it was open-ended questions. And he answered them, and then at the end he said, that's all I can recall. And then he was asked what, if anything, he could remember about what it smelled like. And you could physically see his response because he reeled back in his chair and his nose twitched and he was shaking and he became very animated and emotional, and he said it smelled like honeysuckle. And he described how her hand was shaking as she brought the gun to her head and how she was breathing deeply as she shot herself. And then he said that the blood flowed from her head like motor oil. And he was surprised that he could remember that. And what is most significant is that he remembered more about what he thought he had already exhausted. Ask about all of the senses. Ask about how this experience affected him or her physically or emotionally, because this helps to capture the experience. How did that make you feel? When you felt that way, what did you think was going to happen? What was your thought process? For women who are being strangled and the edges are going dark and there are stars and they can't breathe, do you know what they think about mostly? I heard it. Their children. How impactful is that? A mother will think about her children because she thinks she's going to die. And she wonders who's going to take care of them. And how impactful is that to understanding and believing her story? That is the human relation. That is the human experience that a jury will understand and believe. Has anything changed for you? Have friends or family noticed anything different about you? What does that give me? A witness. Can I get a witness? Ask what the most difficult part of the experience was, because trauma victims will often repress extremely difficult to handle information. Victims of strangulation, as they are about to die, will lose control of their bladders, and a lot of times they change their clothes because it's embarrassing to them, and they don't want to talk about it. So ask about that. What was the most difficult part of that? And it helps us understand these experiences and establish the difference between consent and non-consent. And finally, ask what, if anything, they can't forget. There was a robbery victim who was beaten in the head with 2 hammers, and the officer was asking the who, what, when, where, why questions, and the victim's getting more and more frustrated because he can't remember the answers to those questions, and he feels like he's getting it wrong and that he should be able to answer these questions. And the interview's interrupted, and the officer takes it a different direction, and he says, "What can you not forget?" And the man began hitting himself in the head. And he's saying, "The hammer's against my skull, the hammer's against my skull. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't think. The hammer's against my skull." Would you not just die to do that in a closing? After that, he could remember significant details about the robbery, including other sensory information and what happened before and during and after. That unlocked his memory, and it gives you chills if you're someone who works with victims. Don't do the who, what, when, where, why questions. If you do them at the end after you've already done everything else. Be careful with them, because trauma can distort memories of time and distance. I hate how long questions. How long were his hands around your throat? How long's too much? How long should I be unable to breathe before it's illegal? How long should a stranger's penis be in your mouth before it's against the law? Trauma is a more extreme version of stress, so do not allow someone to say this is because she is stressed out. Trauma is life-changing. So what to take home from this? Trauma-informed interviewing methods like child forensic interviewing, cognitive interviewing, and everything we've just been through, all the 7 steps that you're going to remember, are important for victims' memory to unlock it and to give her or him the tools to allow juries, their family members, to believe. Because everyone deserves to be believed. Go back in that time, set the day, set the stage, use the senses. Do not ever ask, what is the next thing you remember? Because they will tell you what the next thing they remember is. And I don't care what the next thing you remember is. I care about what I can get out. And I've missed an opportunity if I say, what is the next thing you remember? I'm trying to open up that memory. And I include this because I just want to remind you that what you're doing is giving respect. This is what we do when we work with victims, but that is a victim. You wake up every morning to fight the same demons that left you so tired the night before. And that, my love, is bravery. Talking to you about what happened is bravery. And now we have the tools to give back respect. Any questions? So I did take you to 1 o'clock, so I understand everybody's going to leave. If there are any questions, I'll either hang around or I can hang around up here if you feel like what you have is a question that benefits the group.
Is this PowerPoint available
Pagel, is this PowerPoint going to be available to everyone?
I can make it available.
That would be great.
Okay, this PowerPoint will be available to everyone.
I have a question about the presentation where you were talking about the police interview and giving coffee. I wasn't clear on whether this was a good thing or a bad thing.
An excellent thing. So the two things that were good about that is coffee helped open up that, because the limbic system is right there by the olfactory bulb. That strong smell of coffee was what was helping to wake up her brain, but also the experience of when you have a cup of coffee with someone, there's no sense of rushing. There's no sense of, I've got somewhere to be. So it made it a more open experience to where she was able to talk about things in the order she wanted, not that kind of notepad situation.
All right, so if everyone could join me in thanking Courtney. Again, just thank you to all of the attorneys who volunteered this year. We truly appreciate what you do for the Protective Order Project. If you didn't sign the sign-in sheet, please do so on your way out. Thank you.